The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. If you can reply on the questions panel and let me know if you can hear me well, that would be great, so that we can start with it. All good. We've got confirmation, so we're good to go. All right then. So welcome everyone to our new webinar of the IFC collaboration series that we're doing on a weekly basis on every Tuesday close to noon, so it doesn't get in the way of your workday too badly. And it's only a short webinar that lasts for about 30 minutes. The whole idea is that we're running through the different steps you get to do when you're exchanging files with other people working with different BIM applications. In this particular case, we're going through the whole process of exchanging and collaborating with exchanging IFC files. So in the first stage, we were preparing the files so that you could get them ready for the whole exchange. Now, with today's webinar, we're actually starting the second part of this, which is the actual exchange of files, where you're going to be required to set the files to export exactly what you've been asked for. So today, we're going to talk about a few things on that. So let's get a few things out of the way first. Again, my name is Nando Mogollon. I'm a digital design consultant with Central Innovation and got a degree in architecture and BIM management and roughly 19 years of industry experience. For any next webinars, you can click on, well, you won't be able to click on the link since it's a video, but you can go to that link there on the screen on the bit.ly Archicad events, or you can simply point your phones at that QR code on screen and you'll take you to the website where you can subscribe for the next webinars. What we're going to talk about today, it's basically two things. First, we need to find out what exactly is that you have been required to exchange. So in other words, now that we have a file that's been set up with some translators and some views so that you can manipulate the content that you're going to send, we need to gather the information that is required from us from certain documents. And what I try to do here is to give you a broad idea of where that information might be. So that information will be coming to you probably in the shape of information delivery manuals, which is a fairly mature document from Building Smart, and we'll show you what's in there and how or what is relevant for you there. Exchange information requirements, which is another concept that came from the British standard and then went through the international ISO standard, the 19650 so far. And we'll take a look at BIM Execution Plans and where that information might be there. Now, those are documents that you need to know that they exist, and you need to know how do they relate to each other, because some of them might be repetitive, as in some of these documents and tables that you'll find may have similar information, but the information they're trying to convey and they're trying to capture, it's pretty much the same. And we'll show you what exactly you're trying to look at. And then we're going to take a look at a few of the tools that you actually will use in practice, so that in the second bit of, in about 10 or 15 minutes, in the second bit of this webinar, we'll show you where do you set up your files to follow those information requirements. So for those, we're going to take a brief look at the information delivery plans, the model progression tables, and particularly we're going to look at a tool that we have in Australia from Natspec that generates properties. So it is a great tool for both the planning of the BIM process, so that you can include that in your execution plans or exchange information requirements. And we'll do that in tandem with Archicad. So we're going to transfer things from that property generator, and you'll see where that links or where that relates to your Archicad setup so that you produce the information you've been asked for. All right, without any further delay, let's start with the first things that we need to look at. First, let's have a brief introduction to what is an IDM, or Information Delivery Manual. The Information Delivery Manual is it's essentially a document that describes how you set up the mapping of the processes on a collaborated project into the digital exchange of information. That IDM, or Information Delivery Manual, was first of all, it was an initiative of Building Smart, and it's basically, you can find it still online in a document that I'll share with you, the link at the end. And that's basically a long document that describes the whole design and construction process and how that relates to the information model. It's also an ISO standard that you can find. It's the 29481. Quite a long one, but it's worth reading if you're getting deeper into this. A couple of things you'll find in that document will be things like, how do you develop an information delivery manual, including, and that's what's relevant to us today, the exchange of the information that is required, so the exchange of requirements, and the exchange of requirements for the model, because it also applies to documentation, but what we're actually focusing on is the models. And that will be linked, and it is linked to the concept of model view definitions, which is something, as if you remember from previous webinars where we're talking about that, it's a subset of the entire IFC structure of the file that specifies a particular use of the file, things like collaboration or facilities management and so on. What is relevant from there is that they're going to be part of that model view definition that will be deliverable. So that's the bits and pieces that you actually need to make sure you're including in your models. So, if you're really interested in that, we don't have a long time in these webinars to cover every single detail of it. But if you're interested in that, go download those documents, take a read, and see what it's in there. So the Information Delivery Manual is, above all, a high-level document that describes how the entire process will happen and what should be covered in the process, but it doesn't go into the detail. Then we have the more recent concept of Exchange Information Requirements, or EIR. That particular exchange information requirements is derived from the ISO 19650 that basically describes, in this particular graphic that is taken from there, how the exchange of information that is required to develop a project typically is built on what the project requires and what the asset requires, or the real building. You can, sort of understand this, although it's not a hardcore explanation, but it gives you a good idea. The information that is required for the project or for the real building, the asset, is basically the what, exactly what do you need. So what are the functional parts, what are the model requirements for the sake of the project itself, and then the exchange of information requirements, this particular set of requirements or documents that explain what the requirements are, is basically saying how, who, and when that information will be exchanging hands. So that particular set of information that is required to be exchanged among all the stakeholders needs to be produced in a way that explains who will produce it, how is it going to be produced, and when or at what stage that's going to be produced. So it is within that concept, within that stage and set of information, that you have things like BIM Execution Plans, Master Information Delivery Plans, Task Information Delivery Plans, which is sort of the same, only by discipline, and the old concept of model progression specification, which is that table that specifies model elements, level of detail or level of development, and model element authors. So that's a more of an old type of document. that actually serves the purpose of the exchange of information requirements. So again, this is a little bit below the level of an IDM, but still fairly general in that it will describe a lot of the things that need to happen inside a project, but doesn't really describe on its own what you need to export. But it contains those documents. So let's keep going on this. BIM Execution Plans, as you know, then that is a part of the exchange information requirement. So you will expect that a BIM Execution Plan is part of that, but it's not completely encompassing everything that it's required to be exchanged, because documents and drawings are all, and schedules and databases are also part of that exchange of information. But the BIM Execution Plan refers to the modeling part of it. So that is still relevant, and you want to take a look at that for the sake of keep track of what needs to be produced from your models. What I have on the screen is, for the sake of reference, the most locally relevant example might be the free for download BIM management plan, which is the BIM Execution Plans with a bunch of other documents from Natspec that it's free for you to download. And within that, you'll find information that is required for specifying model exchanges. Some of those can be described with tables like this one here on the screen, which is a Master Information Delivery Plan, or MIDP. I'm not showing a screenshot of the TIDP, but it's essentially pretty close. And what that is, as you can see there, it's a list that describes who needs to produce what and at what stage. So it will have information about how to recognize or identify the documentation or models, when that's going to happen from those milestones on, and different classifications on how that gets classified. What's the current version, the exchange formats, what the package belongs to, and so on. So this is a high level type of information exchange. And this particular example, I took it from, again, one of those publicly available websites that we have here in Australia. This one it's quite a good example from Transport for New South Wales, from the digital engineering department. So if you go to that website, news and events, reports and publications, you'll be able to find that with the templates or technical documents, I believe. Then you have the model production delivery table. So now we're getting a little bit more into the details of this. What do you have in there? It's pretty close to what used to be in the past the model progression specification, where you have a description of the systems or pieces of model that you have to produce. You have who's responsible for that, and also what's going to be the level of definition, classifications, and additional nodes. And that is derived, or that's described on different stages or milestones on the projects. You have a definition of what needs to be described at every stage by the author, by the level of development, and how that classified and so on. Again, this particular example for the model production delivery table, it's taken again from Transport of New South Wales. It's a fairly good example, but it's also set for the purpose of their own operation. So there's nothing magic in there other than being a nice example and a locally relevant example. Then you also have things like the model progression specification, as it used to be called in the past, which is essentially the same thing. And Natspec has one of those documents as an appendix of the BIM Execution Plan that you can see here on this preview page there. And it's basically describing the same thing. It's describing a model structure here on the left, and then the LOD and author of every single part, right? Still, what you have there are very generic elements, but now you can see how it is getting into the details of the slabs, the floors, the walls, the doors, and so on, described in the left-hand side of this portion here. So now you're getting into the more and more details of what needs to be exchanged at what stage. Again, that's the actual, I think it's an Excel file that you can get from there as a preview. Now, let me show you where do you find that stuff, or where do you get that that filtering when it comes to what you can define inside Archicad. So these we saw already in previous webinars. So when it comes to content, basically having to export, the grids, the levels, the topography, the footings, the beams, the walls, and so on. That's what you want to control from your Archicad at two different levels. At one level, you have this idea where you can filter things out simply by the view that you're using for export on one side. On the second side, you also, which is the main tool for you to control that, will be within every translator that you use for a particular exchange. In my case, as you remember, have different translators for different exchanges. In there, you have modal filters right here that you can set for specific purposes. So every single entity or IFC entity that is ticked in that list will be exported. But of course, depending on what you have on a model progression specification or a delivery table, you're going to be asked to export certain things and other things may not be exported. So that list, it's a list that gets replicated pretty much in here depending on content. One of those more common examples will be space models, or models that only describes the spaces. Those are ones that in this list you only will have spatial entities or elements that are down there on the list, and basically nothing else. So that'll be your main means for controlling the export. Now let's go and take a look at the more complex one, which is not only the element types that you need to export in this particular exchange, but actually the parameters that you've been required to share with others. So for that, we're going to use, only because it's a very practical and very efficient tool, we're going to use this properties generator that is available under the Natspec website. And we'll show you in a bit how that works. But what I want to show you there is that from the website, what you can get is a single definition of every single element. So in this case, that example that I'm showing there is just for ceilings, for suspended unit ceilings. And in that particular case, that tool will allow you to export the technical requirements when it comes to classification of the information. So what element type it is, in what element class, so if it's a covering, and if it's a ceiling, what level of development, if it's necessary. And also, more important than that, the data that is required for you to provide. So for instance, what I have in there is nothing magic, it's just for the sake of the example, I'm having general data about specifications and general information of the particular element, plus a classification system that I decided to choose from Natspec. What we want to do, and that's what we're going to show you in a minute, is that this table here needs to be mapped into Archicad, into those IFC types. Basically what you do is the identification of the elements need to be mapped, and we showed you some of that. I'll show you just now again, but need to be mapped so that the element type and the subtype, the predefined type of the IFC entity gets mapped correctly. So in that particular case, from the website, we're saying, look, for a ceiling to be recognized as a ceiling, it needs to be covering with a ceiling type. And that's exactly what in Archicad you will expect if you have that mapped correctly. And then for the sake of properties, what you want to do is to make sure that these properties that have been required from the requirements that we set already have been mapped correctly into Archicad, and more important than that, that they have been linked to something that fills up that information inside Archicad. We'll show you that as well. So how do you do that in practice? Let's give you a quick example. So the first thing that I'll do is I'm just going to jump here to the Natspec website. And what you want to do is this BIM properties generator. All you need to do is click on that. So it eventually will take you to, actually, let me do it from the get-go. So all you need to do is to click on this link, read all the word in there, and then you select which type of element do you want to define. So if I am the customer or the owner of the building, this is where I will start. And then we'll say, hey, let's use the same example. Hey guys, for any suspended ceilings or flush ceilings, we want to require this particular information. So the first thing that happens when you click on that link is you get a pre-populated definition of the element type covering ceiling. And then you have a list of available properties depending on their source and available classifications. So I'm going to use those boxes here to filter what data do we need. There's instructions on here, so this is not replacement for actually training on how to do this or understanding how to use this particular link, but it will serve the purpose of doing what we need to do now. If I don't filter anything, what I get is a long list here with absolutely everything that is available for the ceilings. But doing so will simply, overpopulate the file with unnecessary information and probably wrong information or missing data. So that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is to filter this out. So probably you're going to get this requirement, let's say, just to keep things simple, pre-populated with a requirement for IFC 2x3, let's say, or IFC 4. Either way, let's use IFC 4 for now so you see that. So once I click on that, the first thing that happens down here is that only information required by IFC 4, you see the source here, is the one that is being included. So nothing else will be included. But still, that's everything in the IFC 4, which is not what I'm looking for. All I'm looking for in the IFC 4 will be, let's say, we need code compliance data. And if I click on that, only that information will be included. So code compliance will be fire rating, flammability, and spread of flame. And there is a short description there of what it is and where it goes in the file. So if I need that, that's all that included, but it's very likely that you're going to get a requirement for for more than just that. So for the sake of the project itself, not the asset, you may need the code compliance data. You also may need the specification data, that one down here. That's going to ask you about the finish, whether it's external or not, whether it's permeable, if it's combustible, and a few other things. So you can see that as long as you start adding more to this, you're going to get more properties than you need to map in here. So depending on what is required, you will be bringing things into your file or not. Let's use this just to give you a couple of examples on how to transfer this into Archicad. So if this is what I require, more likely this will be put on some kind of file. This website has the advantage of producing that as an Excel or as a PDF. So if you get an Excel like so, let me open that so let's see what do I get. All right, so you get all of this. Oh, I didn't choose a classification. That's why that got populated with everything. So let me simply get rid of that for now. And let's play with just this part here. So there are a couple of things that you want to know from there. What's the parameter that you need to populate and where the parameter is supposed to be living. So let's use this fire rating for now. Fire rating, it's the name of the parameter, and it's a standard name because it's coming from IFC. And the group or property set is the covering common property set. So what you'll want to do inside Archicad is to set up your translator. Let's say the one that I'm using for the purpose of coordination exchange, and go to the property mapping right there. And I want to use one specifically for this particular exchange. So again, you're actually started doing one there. Just going to name it information required for coordination. So that's going to be a specific dedicated property mapping just for that. And there are two things you want to do from here. First one will be to select the right element. In this particular case, I have it pre-selected, so that's why coverings were selected already there. And you'll have a list of every single property set that is available for that one type of element. And all you need to do is to make sure that you will link those to something inside your Archicad file. In that way, that particular parameter will be included in the IFC, one, and second, it will be pre-populated with some sort of information inside your file. So let's go back here. File rating should go under covering common. All right, so let's take a look at that. Covering common, that's my property set, it's already there. File rating, it's already there. And the out-of-the-box Archicad property mappings, it's already mapping that to different parameters in the file. Fire resistance levels, which is this one here, which is actually a property inside your file. As you can see, well, you won't pre-select that. But also other properties for objects and element types. So I don't need to do more than that. I'm not sure if I did ask for the finish, so I can do that. Yeah, so look, finish, also it's also required. But in my file, the finish is not being linked. So how do you do that? Easy. You get that one parameter. You say you're going to create a new rule. Our rule doesn't have to be typed anything in there. It's just creating a sequential ruling method so that it reads from some data inside Archicad. And in here, down here, that's where you link that to whatever finish parameter you think it will be relevant. Let's say for that, I want to use let's say that I'm using slabs, which is common for the ceilings, and that the actual finish on the bottom of the slab will be what I want to use as a finish. So whatever name of that is, that's going to give me the name of the surface inside Archicad. So I'm just going to map that to that. So this will be the name of the surface. That's going to be mapped into the finish. How do I check that? Easy. You just have to do this once. So that'll be creating a mapping for the coordination, as you can see there. You click on OK, and now this should be using that particular mapping. All right. So let's go and check. If you want to check that, you need to use your IFC project manager. And one extra trick in there is that your project manager should filter out only the parameters that are in use. For that, you just click this button here. And if you want to also filter parameters that are not only used but have been populated, so they have values, you click the next button there. So that's filtering out a lot of things that you may not be relevant in the current state of the file. So let's take a look at this. On the left-hand side, I have a selection of those ceiling types. You see that they are being classified correctly. So the type is covering and the predefined type is ceiling. So that is right. And that the finish itself, it's already populated with the name of the surface color. How do I know that? Let's move this to the side so you will see how that works. You go there, and you can see I've got a fairly ugly blue ceiling there, but it serves the purpose. So if I take, let's say, this one, and I change the surface or finish of the bottom from that blue to a this yellow color, right? What you will expect to happen is that the IFC will be immediately populated. Let's update this list. That IFC will be immediately populated with the new information, in this particular case, the name of that surface. So basically what you do is you remap absolutely everything to these properties, and in that way you can say that you can tick every single box of these specific properties that you have been requested, and therefore going back the whole change, there we go. Going back the whole chain, you will be able to be responding to information exchanges exactly with the properties that are needed, with the right information, depending on how you map that, back to the type of models that have been requested. Just to wrap up, since we're already at the end of the webinar, some relevant websites where I've got all the information that I was showing you there on the screen. For Australia, you can go to the bim.natspec.org. That's where you get more of the resources. International resources can be found on the technical site of the Building Smart organization. That's technical.buildingsmart.org. For Australia, and I believe it covers New Zealand as well, you can go to the Australian BIM Alliance group on that website there. There are two particularly good examples in Australia. I couldn't find anything, and I'm not quite aware of specific examples in New Zealand, but for Australia, you can find two publicly available templates and standards of what we were talking about now from the Victorian Department of Digital Engineering and the New South Wales Transport and Digital Engineering Department, who also has a lot of good content in there and things that you can take a look at. From New Zealand, almost everything is being condensed in the BIM Handbook. So from there, you have a lot of information that you can read on, and that will take you to great templates and guides that you can follow for the same purpose. All right, so with that, we finished part one. Next week, we're going to get into the deeper bits and pieces of how to exchange that. So now that we start creating those files, what are you going to send and what are you going to receive? In the meantime, for anything that requires help on the technical side, get help on those email addresses there on the screen for both Australia and New Zealand. Anything that requires special attention from our teams, you can give them a call on the support hotline or send them an email on customersuccess@centralinnovation.com for both Australia and New Zealand. Thank you for your time, guys, and we'll see you next week. We'll send out a link for the registration for the next webinar, so keep an eye on that. And these webinars will be recorded and will be available from a day or two from my CI in case you need to rewatch. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.